On June the 4th, 1961, a 44-year-old American president walked out of a meeting in Vienna, convinced he had just failed his first real test on the world stage and that nuclear war might be inevitable. The Vienna summit was supposed to be a chance for the young John F. Kennedy and the seasoned Nikita Khrushchev to size each other up, maybe ease some tensions between the superpowers. Instead, it became one of the most disastrous diplomatic encounters of the entire Cold War. Kennedy had only been president for 4 months. He was still reeling from the Bay of Pigs disaster in April, where a CIA-backed invasion of Cuba had failed spectacularly. Khrushchev knew this, and the Soviet premier, who had outmaneuvered Eisenhower and other Western leaders for years, saw an opportunity to test the inexperienced American leader. The meeting took place over 2 days in early June in the Austrian capital, neutral ground between East and West. From the start, Khrushchev was aggressive, almost bullying. He lectured Kennedy on communist ideology, dismissed American concerns, and refused to budge on any substantial issue. But it was on the second day, June 4th, that Khrushchev dropped his bombshell. He threatened to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany by the end of the year. Now, to understand why this was such a massive deal, you need to know about Berlin's unique situation. After World War II, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, deep inside the Soviet zone, was also divided the same way. By 1961, West Berlin had become a democratic island surrounded by communist East Germany, and the only access routes for the Western powers were guaranteed by post-war agreements with the Soviets. Khrushchev's threat was clear. If he signed a treaty with East Germany, those agreements would be void. The Soviets could claim they no longer controlled access to Berlin. East Germany did. And if the Western powers tried to maintain their presence in West Berlin, it would be considered an act of war against East Germany, which would trigger Soviet intervention. This was a direct challenge to American credibility. If Kennedy backed down, he would look weak, and NATO allies might question whether the United States would really defend them against Soviet aggression. But if he stood firm, it could mean war, possibly nuclear war, over a city that was virtually impossible to defend militarily. Kennedy tried to reason with Khrushchev, explaining that Western access to Berlin was not negotiable. The conversation grew heated. At one point, Khrushchev said that if America wanted war over Berlin, the Soviet Union would accept the challenge. Kennedy responded that it would be a very cold winter. When the summit ended, Kennedy was visibly shaken. He told a New York Times reporter that it was the roughest thing in my life. He confided to his brother Bobby that Khrushchev thought he was weak and that the Soviet leader would push harder on Berlin and other issues. Kennedy wasn't wrong. Throughout the summer of 1961, the Berlin crisis escalated. Thousands of East Germans, seeing the writing on the wall, fled to West Berlin while they still could, nearly 20,000 in July alone. The East German economy was hemorrhaging its best and brightest. Then, in the early morning hours of August 13, 1961, just 10 weeks after the Vienna summit, East German soldiers began stringing barbed wire across Berlin. Within days, a concrete wall began rising, physically dividing the city. The Berlin Wall would stand for 28 years, becoming the most powerful symbol of the Cold War divide. Kennedy, learning from Vienna, took a measured approach. He reinforced the American garrison in West Berlin and made it clear that the United States would defend its sector, but he didn't challenge the wall itself. In private, he even acknowledged that a wall was a hell of a lot better than a war. Khrushchev never signed that separate peace treaty. The wall, in a grim way, stabilized the situation by stopping the refugee flow. The crisis diffused, but the scars remained. In 1963, Kennedy would return to Berlin to deliver his famous "Ich bin ein Berliner" speech, reaffirming American commitment to the city's freedom. So what began on June 4, 1961, in a Vienna meeting room, with threats, posturing, and mutual miscalculation, ended up literally dividing a city with concrete and barbed wire. Kennedy learned that in superpower politics, showing strength sometimes means knowing when not to fight. And the world learned that the Cold War could turn hot over something as simple as access rights to a bombed-out city. The Berlin Wall would eventually fall in 1989, but the lessons from that tense June day in Vienna, those echoes still resonate whenever nuclear powers sit down across from each other today.